something serious happened to Libya, to your country. So, like, give us some kind of understanding, like what really happened.
Okay. What happened was there was a natural disaster, if I can put it in this way. There was a massive storm in the Mediterranean that affected many other countries in its way to Libya. And, it caught that part of the region completely unaware. I mean, the people responsible for monitoring storms and so on, they had predicted that this storm is going to hit the Libyan coast. However, all initial information had indicated that it's going to hit the city of Benghazi.
Mm,
That's everyone at that time. All the anticipation, all the data that was available showed that this is where it's going to hit. And therefore, the local authorities in Benghazi, including the army and security services, the municipality, and so on, acted on that on that assumption. So the authorities had taken every precaution to prepare for the storm hitting Benghazi. So they evacuated people who had residences near to the coast. They had decided that there's a curfew in the city between certain dates. Schools were closed in anticipation. So they did everything any other responsible government would do in order to minimize the damage. However, when the storm hit, yeah, Benghazi was hit as well, but it was moderate force. So the storms and the rainfall and so on was manageable. So it just went past Benghazi, and unfortunately, it hit Derna and parts of the western mountain, that we have the Green Mountain region leading up to Derna. That's where the storm hit. So yes, now we hear about Derna and being the center of the disaster, but let us not forget a lot of other towns and villages along the mountain area that were also affected, and they're just as badly affected. But Derna, because the concentration of the population there and the severity of the floods as a result of these two dams bursting, that's what resulted in this tragic loss of life and property and so on. So that's basically what happened in Libya. It's totally natural disaster. It's not affected, it's not attributed to anything else other than that.
I'm not judging anything here. Like I've just read a couple of things, and then one of the things it said that the same storm hit like places like Greece, and their casualties were just only 6 people died. But in terms of Darna, it seems like 34,000 people just displaced. And I think like over 3,000 people died as well. It's a big number. But it looks like it's a natural disaster, but at the same time, the two dams. Tell us about these two dams, like, because it looks like these two dams is actually very crucial for this outcome.
Okay. I mean, before talking about the dams, let us talk about Libya as a country. Libya had been under the rule of Gaddafi for 42 years, as you know that. Before that, it was under the rule of the kingdom, and before that, it was the Italian and the British. So Libya as a country never really settled and or had any long-term plan to develop the infrastructure or develop the country as such. So during Gaddafi's time, I mean, the mountain, the area where Derna is very famous mountain position. There was natural beauty such as waterfalls and rivers and so on. So the notion of having flood defenses and so on, really is a new thing. So, for example, these dams were built only in the 70s. I think 78 or whatever, the Gaddafi's government decided to build 2 dams to protect the city from flash floods. Now, that was a very rare occurrence. It's not something that happens at all. In fact, the last time there was flooding in Derna was in 1959. Never happened after that, at least not to this catastrophic effect. Yeah, there might be small flooding or whatever, and it's easily dealt with. So the project was given to a very small Yugoslav company to construct these 2 dams. Yeah, so they've been there till 78. There's been very little maintenance, of course, because the infrastructure is just not there, or the will or the political will from the authorities to make sure that these places are regularly maintained. They sort of adopted the philosophy that we don't get any major floods anyway, so why spend money on something that is not going to be utilized? In 2010 or 2009, 2010, there was a project that was given to a Turkish company or companies to maintain the dams. So 78, nothing until 2010, 2011 to ask these companies to maintain the dams. As far as I understand, that's as far as from what I read, no work actually taken place. There was funding that was made available, but actual work, nothing happened, simply because not long after this contract was awarded, the Libyan revolution in 2011 started. The company became afraid for their safety and so on, and they left the country. And as far as I know, they are still pursuing compensation from the Libyan authorities for the loss of their equipment and so on. However, one thing that's totally undisputed is that they have not carried out any work whatsoever on these 2 dams. So the infrastructure was crumbling. When rainfall, as a result of the storm, that was a month's worth of rain had fallen in less than 24 hours. You can imagine with the crumbling infrastructure and so on, what happened. The dams were not able to contain the water. Where the city was positioned, so the dams were high up. And just imagine when the dams were burst, there's nothing stopping them. It's like, rolling a massive stone from a top of a mountain, and basically it took everything in its power. And you can see from the images that we've all seen in the screens and so on, how it just took everything in its power until it reached the sea. And that's why there was this massive destruction and the massive loss of life. Now, a lot of people say, okay, why did the authorities not evacuate? How can you evacuate or anticipate to evacuate against something that you weren't expecting? How can you evacuate 35,000 homes in a very short period of time? So yeah, it really is. It's a massive disaster. And now when you hear about people or Western media talking about, the authorities didn't care, they didn't take any action. I actually challenge any other country that could have reacted to something like this, given the circumstances and given the time frames that we're talking about here. I think it was just a very sad, tragic event that is totally out of anyone's control, as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, the way I see it, I mean, if you bring all the bigger picture, I mean, bigger picture is much more complex. We are talking about a country divided, going through civil war. So, I mean, when you talk about like authority or administration, these are quite weakened already anyway.
Mm.
So, um, so I think, like one of the criticism was that uh, it's not an earthquake. It's a storm. So there was a alert there, at least 72 hours before. So you had enough time. Why did you not evacuate people when you are aware of these two dams are are potentially very vulnerable? So those criticisms are there, but I can sense like what you are saying. It's just difficult given the situation, isn't it?
Absolutely. And as I said, I mean, yeah, there were warnings. There was a 72-hour window there. And as I explained, I think all the reports at the time indicated that the storm will land in Benghazi rather than anywhere else along the coast. And that's
Mm,
why a lot of the efforts had been focused there. Now, I'm not saying that there couldn't have been more done to maybe evacuate people from along the coast. However, when you consider that Libya as a country, Libya is, you know, about 10 times the size of the United Kingdom, with
mm,
the majority of the population living in the coastal areas.
mm,
So from Benghazi all the way to the Egyptian border along that coast region,
mm,
that's very, very heavily populated areas. And the rest down below is nothing but desert. So, for example, let's argue, for argument's sake, we're going to evacuate the people from Derna.
mm,
Evacuate them to where? Because, as I explained, when the storm hit, it hit pretty much from east of Benghazi all the way to Derna and beyond. So, the idea about evacuation is not as straightforward. We're not talking about a country where there's, ready infrastructure to deal with this kind of thing or easily evacuate people. So I don't really accept this criticism that more could have been done to evacuate people. I think what I accept is that there should have been and must have been more effort to ensure that the infrastructure that's in place is capable to withstand anything like that. These two dams should never have been allowed to rot or get to the stage that they've got to, and therefore cause the disaster. Now,
mm,
having said that, I'm not saying that the authorities, and when I'm talking about the authorities, I'm talking about local authorities.
mm,
Um, they could have done more, yes, because now we understand that funding was made available in 2012, for example, to maintain these two dams,
mm,
but no work had taken place. So someone in a country rife with political and security unsettlement.
mm,
Corruption is absolutely rife from the top. And when I say from the top, I mean from the highest power until the lowest. They are corrupt. Talking about corrupt government in Tripoli, I'm talking about corrupt presidential council, I'm talking about corrupt institutions throughout. And that's a fact. No one can deny that.
mm.
So, put all these things together, you can see how there was massive failures. And unfortunately, these failures resulted in, you said 2,000 people dead. The figures are anything between 10 and 30,000 people that are still unaccounted for.
Yeah.
So this is what we're looking at in Derna here.
Mm, mm. Like my understanding is like with this kind of political event, it's a big tragedy for this country, isn't it? The country has been going through tragedy after tragedy, and now this came from nowhere. Um, like what's your take? Like, will it take time to reconcile this thing? Like, because I mean, it's not only the fact finding mission, but also it looks like it's not in like one person's fault. It's like collective problem because the countries who are involved in Libya, the countries who are doing business in Libya, they've got serious stake in Libya. I think Libya, drills like millions of barrels oil every day. The country has got lots of money, but the problem is where the money is going. Swiss bank or like these people outsiders making huge amount of money from this crisis. So I think it's like more need to be said about those things as well.
I totally agree. I mean, I talked about corruption at the highest levels of the Libyan government and institutions. That's an absolute fact. Um, we have a government of national unity based in Tripoli that has absolutely no power or interest, to that matter, in anything that is east of Sirte, for example, and that's in the middle of the country. They have no interest. They have no power whatsoever in the east of the country, or have any interest in having any kind of engagement with people in the east. So government based in Tripoli, really ruling Libya from Tripoli. Do you know that the prime minister who has been in power for nearly 3 years now, has never visited Benghazi or the east of the country? Never. So he has no interest. Also, I'm sure I'm not the only one that would say that, and I'm sure you know, he has no interest in Libya, full stop, never mind east or west. He comes from a family that made their businesses and their fortune from stealing from the Libyan people. They are the most corrupt family you can imagine, and that started even during the days of Gaddafi. They were corrupt and they were stealing Libyan funds. I'm talking about a regime that was, for some reason, appointed by the UN to rule Libya for the main purpose to oversee a transitional period leading to democratic elections. Their first act was to make sure that any talk or hope of election is thwarted immediately. So they should have done that within 12 months of getting in power. As I said, they've been in power for 3 years now. We are nowhere near election, fair or otherwise. There's no interest, because they see it as, for as long as the status quo is maintained, they will remain in power, and they will continue to plunder the wealth of the country. They have no interest in settlement. They have no interest in elections. They have no interest in building the country or the infrastructure. They're happy to stay in power. They're happy to be supporting the militias in the west of the country and giving them money and influence in order to keep them in power. And there's nothing there for the rest of the country. So this is at the highest level of government. And then people, I've heard many reports start talking about the role of the parliament in the east of Libya, the role of Gaddafi, Haftar and his power. They still call them Haftar's forces. They refuse to call them by what they really are, and that is the Libyan National Army. That's what it is. It's the remnants of the Libyan National Army after Gaddafi has gone, who were gathered together and actually fought terrorism in the east of the country. They fought ISIS, they fought Ansar al-Sharia, they fought many very nasty people in the east. That's documented, that's there, that's part of history. Whether the Western powers decide to ignore it or stop talking about it, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It did happen. There's very well documented fight against terrorism in the east of the country that would never have been able to be won if it wasn't for the Libyan National Army, which Haftar commands. These are facts. I'm not making them up. But instead, the Western powers, Western media, like to call it for what it is: the internationally recognized government. That's the terms that they use. So there is a internationally recognized government in Tripoli, as I said, not elected, appointed by the United Nations, not by the Libyans, by the United Nations. Similarly, there's a presidential council yeah, that's supposed to oversee or act as the president of the country, again, appointed by the United Nations, not Libyans, United Nations. So if the United Nations is able to appoint governments and able to appoint presidential councils and are in agreement with these bodies to support armed militias in the west of the country, why are you blaming every failure on the only two bodies that are supported by the Libyan people? That is a democratically elected parliament and a nationally supported army. Why are you ignoring these, but you are only interested in those failed institutions that the UN had installed in Libya? And now, if anyone comes to look at the real hurdle behind, or the real hurdle in the way of fair and democratic elections, there's absolutely no dispute that that is the government in Tripoli and the militias that are supporting it. Why does the West choose to be ignoring these facts and insisting in supporting those who are brought up or put in place in order to support elections? It doesn't make any sense for me. I'm not getting any answers. I wish you every luck if you can try and understand any of this. But regimes like the UK regime, the UK government, the American government, Turkey, Qatar, Italy, France, you name it, they are all very, very active stakeholders in Libya. Are they doing anything to get us to the point where Libyans choose for themselves? Far from it. They talk the talk, but not a single thing has been done to bring about that outcome. Why? The answer is simple. Libya is a rich country. For as long as it's divided and unable to manage its own affairs, there's more role for these powers to be there and justify being there to support those people that can't support themselves. But in actual fact, they're there for what they can take from Libya. The oil reserves, the the mineral reserves that we have in southern Libya. There's still a huge amounts of funding of Libyan funds that is kept in Western banks to protect them from the Libyans. But if they find a way to get to these funds, I bet you anything, they will be the first ones to be there. So the situation in Libya is as chaotic, as uncertain, and as murky as ever. And those that are making sure it remains like this, I'm afraid to say, are the UN and the Western powers, no one else.
I think you brought lots of things and lots of things to unpack here. I mean, I'm coming here as a kind of UN expert because I did my PhD on United Nations peacekeeping, peace building. And one of the case study I did is like Kosovo and like East Timor. It's a kind of similarities there. I think what UN did here is a kind of, template they used all over the places. Basically, they see a kind of post-conflict situation and then try to go there, try to create some kind of, temporary government to the UN expertise, and then more or less create environment to have that vote or election. But the problem is, I think that in terms of UN is what? UN is us, the world community, the powerful countries, the P5 members. So they play a big role. If you look at East Timor's case, it was successful, the transitional government and everything, because everything was done very quickly, but also lots of resources being poured as well. And also East Timor, there's nothing much there in terms of, oil or anything during that time. So there's no spoil to take. But in Libya, there are lots of other actors, lots of bad actors got involved because lots of spoils to take. So I think for UN, it's difficult because unless it's a demilitarized place, you're not supposed to do any election because it looks like both parties are armed here. And what you are saying, it looks like the half of the country has got some kind of legitimacy from their own people, and the other parties more or less sponsored by the foreign countries and foreign entities. but both are powerful, isn't it? One of the pictures I saw, like US diplomat went to actually meet Haftar the other week. So it looks like USA actually cares about the other part, because those people are important as well. Because, this or that way, you cannot make peace without reconciling the whole country. And one of the news came out after this catastrophic event is, I think it's a kind of sign of, I don't know, like the kind of positive ideas that I think that both parties try to get together and try to help people. Tell us about that story. Did they actually work together?
Okay, let us make a distinction here. Let us make a distinction between the Libyan people and those political actors who are in control of Libya politically now, because the two are completely different things. If we're talking about institutions, me personally, I still fail to see any concrete action that the authorities in Tripoli, this is the internationally recognized government in Tripoli, has taken to support those who have been stricken by this disaster. I can't see it. Maybe there is. I heard that they made $2 million available, as if this is going to sort the problem. Someone who lost all his family, yeah, the money is going to really help him here in this occasion. But in terms of actual actions that any responsible government should and must take to support its people, I fail to see that. There's no evidence whatsoever in that regard. Yes, there's been a lot of meetings. Ministers are meeting in Tripoli and talking about the disaster in Derna. They are nearly 1,600 kilometers away from where the action need to be. But in terms of actual help, there's none. On the other side, if we look at the Libyan people, absolutely, because Libyan people, Libya is still one country. We're still one people. There is not people from the east of Libya and people of the west of Libya. Traditionally and historically, Libya has always been close. There isn't a single family in the east or in the west that doesn't have relatives or in-laws or friends or partners or whatever in the other part of the country. We complement each other, always have done and always will do. And this is why when this disaster struck, one of the first things that everyone recognized, the support from the public, not from the government, from the public institutions, businessmen, civil society from the east of the country. This very quickly they mobilized, they gathered together whatever they can and headed to the stricken areas in order to support their brothers, their countrymen, whatever. So that's the case. So the first thing that was absolutely noticeable as a result of this, how quickly Libyan people came together in the hour of need. Not governments, not government institutions, nothing. The government in Tripoli did absolutely nothing to support those who have been stricken in the east. Maybe I heard that the municipality in Tripoli sent a number of cars to help, deal with the rubble or collect, which is admirable. But again, talking about municipality level, not government level. As I said, as apart from this donation of this amount of money, that's the only thing that's tangible. Whether it ever arrived there or not, that's another story. But there was a press release to say that the government in Tripoli had sent or allocated $2 million for this. If you ask me, these $2 million are probably already sitting in someone's bank account, because that's the type of regime that we have in the west of the country, I'm afraid.
But the problem is, the country has to reconcile this way, that way, because Libya, what you said, that Libya was there, Libya is there, and Libya will be there. In terms of physical or geographic or emotional, there is no division there. But at the same time, it's going on for some time now, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how much they can take, how much Libyans can take, because the when the next disaster will come, then what? That's the thing, because civil society can do things, or like the people, business people can do things, but the problem is the states. If states are not there, then
You talked about the UN and to solve problems around the world and support regimes to or countries to build themselves. You know, since all this started back in 2011 and the revolution and the demise of Gaddafi, to date, there's been no fewer than 6 or 7 UN envoys that have been sent to Libya.
mm,
Now, each of these was appointed for a minimum of 12 months. I think in few occasions, the term for those was extended. So it's been ongoing, and every single one of them had ended in failure. And I mean, massive failure. The
mm,
reason being, A, they couldn't understand the Libyan mentality, and B, they couldn't reconcile what the aims that they want to achieve are and the influence that is imposed on them by the various international actors that have interest in Libya. So, leaving all that behind, the past is the past. Recently, as in towards the end of last year and early this year, there was a massive push. A new UN envoy was appointed. There was a lot of optimism. He made the right noises. There was an agreement by the international community that Libya must have free elections as soon as possible. A date was set for December last year, which is never happened. So now we're talking about, sometime in 2023. Again, if you ask my opinion, it's not going to happen.
mm,
Now, during that period, there was there was marked agreement between the authorities in the east and in the west. And when I say authorities, I'm talking about the parliament in the east
mm,
and what is known as the Supreme Council of State in the west. These are two bodies that were born out of the political agreement that was signed in Morocco back in 2014, 2015. These are the only two recognized bodies in Libya at the moment. These two bodies have got together, despite the fact that one is based in the east, one is based in the west. They worked very closely together in order to determine the laws and the procedures necessary for holding free elections in Libya. This is purely a Libyan-led initiative by Libyan actors, and they have managed to reach an agreement between them. They reach an agreement that, okay, this is what the future is going to look like for Libya. This is how we are going to hold election. They formalized election laws that have been endorsed by both bodies. Everyone in Libya, including the entire Libyan population, are happy. You know why we don't have elections till now? Because the UN decided, no, 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 no. Libyans cannot agree something between themselves without us being involved. And therefore, it was the UN that is blocking this major development that happened for the first time since 2011, that actual Libyan bodies came together and made an agreement together. The UN did not like that. They wanted to devise whatever laws or procedures for elections according to their view, not in accordance to what the Libyans want. How dare the Libyans agree something between each other without going back to the UN? And that's where we are, Abdullah. There is a huge will within the Libyan population to turn the page, have elections. I don't care who wins, whether it's the militias in the West, whether it's Gaddafi's supporters, whether it's anybody in the east of the country. It doesn't matter. Not for me, not for the majority of the Libyan people. All they want is free elections. And whoever these elections will bring, will bring. We're happy with that. But the obstruction is not because of the Libyans or the various bodies in Libya. It's because the UN and those international actors that have interest in Libya, they do not want this to end. They see it as the minute this ends, their influence ends, and therefore they are not ready to support that. So you hear everything gets blamed on Haftar and his army. Everything gets blamed on the parliament or on the Supreme Council of State or that person or that person. But really, deep down, if you dig deep down, the only blame there is it lies at the door of the UN, I'm afraid.
I'm just like trying to play a bit of devil's advocate here. Like in terms of geopolitics, like P5 members. I mean, when I say UN is basically P5 members. You know, the way this kind of things need to be resolved, they have to reconcile and they have to have united front. So that's why East Timor happened. In terms of Kosovo, it never happened because, you know, P5s are divided. Can you break down the P5's role, like the China, Russia, UK, France, and the USA? How much problem there is?
It's very interesting question, and the reason I'm hesitant, they all have their own interest in Libya. They're all approaching it from a different or with a different strategy. So, for example, the UK, for example, the UK have an interest in the status quo maintained. They see it as an opportunity for the UK companies and institutions to perhaps improve their economic situation at the expense of Libya through, I don't know, UK governments being allowed to work in Libya by having influence over the current government in Tripoli. They have no interest in the East. So it's those powers that are making the division. So they have a lot of interest in the west of the country. They're regular visitors and so on. In the East, no, not so much. For example, the current Foreign Secretary, Mr. Cleverly, had visited Tripoli a few times. Yes, he had visited the East once, but to me, that's just we visited. We're engaged with all parts of the country, but in reality, this doesn't exist. France, on the other hand, they started with more influence in the East than the West. For a number of years, the French government had supported Colonel Haftar or General Haftar and his troops. They supported the parliament. They made the right noises when east of Libya, where east of Libya is concerned. The US, again, their position is very strange because they're everywhere. They're one day you find them visiting Haftar and supporting the East region. Most times you find them in the West and making all kinds of noises. They made absolutely no secret about their interest in Libyan oil, however. They are absolutely every single time I hear the UN Special Envoy, sorry, the US Special Envoy talk, he mentions oil and wealth and how this must be protected. It reminds me very much of the Iraq scenario where we don't care what you do with the rest of the countries. We are looking after the oil fields. That's our territory. But the rest of the country, set it on fire for all we care, as long as this part. And that's where the UN are. Russia, again, they're supporting Colonel Haftar until they started their own problems as a result of the war in the Ukraine. Now, as far as I can see, they have no influence or interest to that matter, other than opposing any decision or any idea that the West have, they will oppose it. But in actual fact, they have very little power. China, interestingly, did not really get involved in this. They have supported whatever action the UN as a body had taken. But in terms of exerting influence, there's been very little interest or influence being exerted on Libya by China. I think that's very admirable. I think if there is any resolution, China will have to be part of, because they can act as brokers to any potential settlement there may be. So this is where Libya is. And in between, of course, you add the Italian regime, who see themselves as guardians for Libya. You have the Turkey, who sees themselves as an extension to the Ottoman Empire. So Libya is very important to them. Egypt, as a neighboring country, they have to protect their own interest, in the sense that, you know, there are serious security implications for Egypt should any major development happens in Libya. So yeah, Libya is in a very, very precarious situation. And honestly, the only way out, as far as I'm concerned, if all these actors just leave it to the Libyans to sort out their problems without interference, I think we could potentially have a resolution within a year, if not less. But they need to leave it alone. And this is not going to happen.
I mean, then it gets more tricky, you know. The problem is these powerful countries will not leave. You know, so that's historically they'll never do that, because I mean the way we see like the peace process through UN is always, you know, permitted space. If there is a permitted space, then you can make peace. It looks like Libya is not a permitted space; it's a divided space. So, and I think that's not good news for Libya, because this will protract. This will protract years after years, and the main people will suffer is the actual people, not the regime, not those people who are beneficiary from the whole thing. It's just the people, you know. So like for you, like, you know, so this is your country. It's not easy for you to go back to your country, to like go back to your family. I've got students from Libya, and you know, it's your home, isn't it?
Sure.
And you're not allowed to go back to your home safely.
Well, I sorry to contradict. I wouldn't say it's that bad. I mean, um, we can travel freely back and forth. There's absolutely no restrictions now. Okay, it's not a straightforward journey, as in there's a direct flight. I can jump in and go home, but I can get there. And I try to go to Libya, you know, as often as I can, at least once a year. I managed to do that. There's never been any problem. That's because the situation in the east of Libya is different from the west. Although even the west of the country now, there are a lot of signs for improvement. But I don't think this is an issue, Abdullah. However, had what's happened in Libya now, if this had happened anywhere else, I would say that Libya would have been divided into three countries by now, because that's really the ultimate goal of those international actors. They want to divide Libya. Libya, historically, I'm sure I mentioned this before, historically is three regions. So you have Tripolitania, which is Tripoli and the west. You have Fazan, which is the south of the country, and you have Cyrenaica, which is the east of the country. Historically, Libya was three regions that were united by King Idris when he established the Kingdom of Libya. I think a lot of the international actors would love to see it divided along these lines again, because then control of the country will become easier. So those who are in the east, you know, the countries that are supporting them will have their influence. Same with the west and the south. So, you know, it's quite convenient solution. But the only reason why this hasn't happened in Libya is because, as I explained earlier, the network, the societal interactions that Libyans have with each other, and therefore separation, to my mind, will never happen for as long as the Libyan society continues to interact with each other in the way that it has been. Because, you know, they are one people. no matter where they are or what tribe they are from, deep down, Libyans are one, and therefore they will never allow this to happen. And this put us at a predicament. So if the international powers want to divide us, and we're resisting this division, where does this leave us? So we will continue to move into these circles, one transitional government after another, army in the east, militias in the west. Every time Libyans try to find a solution by talking together, the UN and the international powers oppose it. I have no idea where this will lead us, but I certainly hope that the UN and the international powers realize that there is no solution as they see it in Libya, and that the only solution is to allow the Libyans to make their own mind up about their future. Yes, by all means, support them, encourage them, engage them in debate and dialogue together. Yes, please, more of that. But don't impose solutions on Libyans, because this will never, ever work.
I'm just like going back to the Dhana. I'll just take another 5-10 minutes. Like you mentioned that, though the official figure looks like 3,000, 4,000, but the actual figure can be much, much higher. So what's going on in terms of, those things, like, rescued, like building up things? It looks like it's a serious thing, isn't it? Lots of intervention needs to be there, and very quickly.
I absolutely agree. The scale of the destruction is absolutely immense. When reports talk about 25% of the city of Darna had just disappeared, that's true. You can see the images of before and after of where the flooding had occurred. Just to imagine that in the way of that floods, there were multi-story buildings that no longer exist. And considering that this had happened in the middle of the night, I think it was 2 a.m. Local time when that had struck, and people had absolutely no warning whatsoever of this happening. Basically, entire neighborhoods ended up in the sea, in the bottom of the sea. And I think recent reports have confirmed that there were entire buildings that are submerged underwater. Basically, the flood just took everything in its path and dumped it in the sea. By the morning, it was already too late. People have vanished overnight. Now you're talking about international efforts and rescue efforts and so on. I think the time for that had gone. I think now it's a matter of recovery rather than rescue, recovering what's left, recovering bodies from the sea or from under the rubble. It's been too long to find any survivors. And when we're saying that, the real figures are anything between 10 and 30,000, yes, because that's what they reckon are considered as missing, in the sense that maybe no bodies have been found, or the living have not been accounted for, and therefore the chances are that these figures will increase. There's a real potential of that. I also understand that recently the Libyan authorities, or the authorities in Derna, in the area, have ordered the evacuation of international media agencies and so on. And there's a bit of an outcry about this in the Western media. But I just paint this picture for you. Just imagine an area in the United Kingdom. Just say Dundee was hit by a major disaster, and all of a sudden you have the world media descending on the area. All their interest is in finding a news story. They want to film, they want to interview people, they want to find some information that they can feed into their TV networks or media outlets and so on. And just imagine the chaos that this would bring. They have no interest in actually helping the Libyans. All they're interested in is in airing a news story at any cost.
Mm.
So I wouldn't be surprised if that was true, because it will be absolutely impossible to conduct any rescue or search effort with the world media focusing on every step of the way that you take. In fact, they would be a hindrance in front of you. You're trying to
Mm.
rescue someone from under rubble, but you can't get to it because world media is more interested in taking pictures and taking images of that. So I'm not saying that this news is actually true or not. I have no way of verifying that. But
Mm.
I can just imagine the scene in Derna once all these media agencies have arrived. And now it's not just the media agencies.
Mm.
You have rescue teams from all over the world had, you know, selflessly and absolutely, we're
Mm.
extremely grateful as Libyan people to welcome the help that they're doing. But try and coordinate that in a
Mm.
country where there's no real coordination, no local coordination on the ground. It will be an absolute logistical nightmare. And I
Mm.
think that's what we are facing in the area now. Yes, a lot of goodwill, a lot of offers of help and support, international rescue teams are in place, but everyone is trying to do what they think is the right thing without any real coordination or collaboration between the various agencies. So the situation will continue to be quite dire until such time.
Mm.
You know, I would imagine that eventually, sooner or later, they will say, that's it. The rescue effort is suspended, and then attention will be turned into um, reconstruction efforts and clearing the mess that is in there now. Because really, realistically, every single hour that goes by, every single day, the chances of finding anyone to rescue or indeed anyone to recover will become
Yeah.
smaller and smaller. I think that time is just about upon us now.
Mm. I mean, especially the families who lost, you know, family members. I mean, till they get their closure, I mean, they will wait for them, isn't
Yeah,
it?
that will take a long, long time. And just to put it in perspective, I read something the other day about this particular family in Derna, very famous family in Libya, but they hail from Derna. And a member of that family was talking. Who's that member of family? Was quite a famous writer and poet in Libya. And actually, he was talking, and of course, Libyan culture that families like this will live very close together. So they form a community. Yes, they're one family, but they live in a very particular area.
Mm.
So that guy was talking about losing 90 members of his immediate family.
Wow.
90. They just vanished. There's no, so basically everyone from that family that was in that area at the time had vanished. So basically the entire village where they were is now under the sea. And that's probably happened multiple times with multiple families. Maybe not 90, but you can get the gist of the state or the scale of the devastation that had occurred. Whether these people will ever get over this, hopefully they will, but it will take a very, very long time. And when you put all that loss in one side, and then look at the immense corruption and the chaos that is faced within the rescue effort, you can understand how people can become very frustrated, very angry, and yeah, very disadvantaged because of it.
Mm. Mm. Um, like one very last question, like the more philosophical question, like I mean, did you ever go to that place, the place we are talking about?
Derna.
Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah, I visited Derna multiple times. Derna is one of the most beautiful places you can imagine in Libya. It's very famous. It has, one of the rare waterfalls that we have in Libya. It's a landmark. Everyone wants to go and see this wonderful waterfall. It's beautiful the way it's located with the mountain in one end and the sea on the next. It's absolutely beautiful place. So yes, I had the privilege to visit Derna a number of times. It's a place that's very close to my heart, and I can't imagine visiting again and seeing the level of destruction, because one thing is certain, that Derna that I knew
Mm.
is simply no longer there.
Mm. It's not only the place, it's the memories as well, isn't it? Everything,
Definitely.
our memories, your memories, the families. Um, I think if
Definitely.
you count those things, I mean, the loss is huge.
The loss is absolutely immense. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Uh,
this will never, people that lived there, or maybe perhaps for part of their life were associated with the area. I can't imagine them going back and just seeing everything that they knew just not there anymore. It just vanished overnight. A whole community, a whole city had been almost destroyed. This cannot be a good feeling for anyone, I'm afraid.
mm, mm. Like one piece of advice we can give to the Western media, instead of looking for or digging like scoop news, they should talk to the local people, talk to the families, and learn their stories, because those stories will actually bring peace for everyone.
I totally agree, because what I've observed so far, they're more interested in talking to the
Mm.
politicians, the decision makers. Um, you never ever get the real story from those people, because they have vested interests. Maybe they were culpable themselves in what happened in the mess. But I totally agree with you. If you want the real story, talk to the people, because they will tell you the truth. They will tell you the situation as it is. But you know, just to end this conversation, I'll give you a small antidote, I think, if I can call it that. I read the other day that the head of the Presidential Council, equivalent to the president of Libya, held a meeting with the council of Misrata, of the city of Misrata. Now, between Misrata and Derna, there's a distance of around 1,500, 1,600 kilometers. One in the far east, one is in the far west. So the head of the Presidential Council held a meeting with the council for Misrata in Misrata to discuss the implications of the devastation in Derna. Can you imagine? Why not hold the conversation with the council of Derna, or the nearby city of Tobruk, or even in Benghazi, which is the largest municipality to them, to help them? But no, instead, they made the decision to travel 1,500 kilometers to Misrata to talk about the implication of the disaster for Derna. Total and utter chaos, total disorganization, no real effort whatsoever from the authorities in Libya to actually do something that's worthwhile. Instead, they're sitting there, they are accepting all the aid that is pouring in from the Western powers, from well-wishers. What's going to happen to that aid? I have no idea. It would not surprise me in the least to find some of the supplies being sold in the markets there, or any equipment, or whatever, being divided among those interested, because I'm afraid that is the country that is called Libya now, and it's in no small measure due to the influence of the UN and the international powers that got us to this situation.
Thank you, Abby. I mean, I'll not expand this thing, because it's such a powerful last couple of minutes he talked about, it's a serious thing. I mean,
Definitely.
I think I don't have that, power resources to fathom, what really happened to the place, to the people, to the country. And then, the sideshow is happening, the big sideshow happening somewhere else, not in the ground zero where people are actually waiting for, it's like, when people, the example you gave, I think that's totally disrespectful to the people, who lost their lives, who's everything gone. I'll stop here.
Okay, Abdullah. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk.
Okay, thank you, Abi.
Yeah, Abdullah. Thanks very much. Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.